The Revenge of the Wizard's Ghost by John Bellairs, Chapter 9. Fergie played the strong beam of his red searchlight around the enormous dark church. Above them was a vaulted stone ceiling and 2 rows of pointed arches, marched down to the nave, toward the altar at the eastern end. Several tall scaffolds, made of iron pipes and boards, stood throughout the room, and there were whitewash buckets, bags of cement, and tool chests, signs that work had been going on. Fergie looked around in awe, but the professor was in a brisk and businesslike mood. Handing the tool bag to Fergie, he reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a dog-eared booklet. It was the guide to the Windrow estate. "Now then," barked the professor, as he trained the beam of his flashlight on the book. "It seems that this church is not an exact replica of Salisbury Cathedral. There is no crypt in the original church, but there's one in this building. And, as you well know, that's where we're going. Humph! The entrance to the crypt is behind the main altar at the eastern end of the church. Come on." They walked down the middle of the dark church and up a short flight of steps to the altar, which consisted of an oblong block of stone with a bronze cross and 2 candlesticks on it. Behind the altar, Fergie and the professor found a gaping hole in the floor. Near it lay a stone slab and a crowbar that had been used to pry the stone out. The professor chuckled grimly as he swung the flashlight's beam down into the blackness. "Well, well, well," he said. "These workmen have been extremely helpful to us so far. Maybe they had work to do down there. There are some stone steps, too. How very convenient! Look out below, you ghosts and goblins. We're coming down." Fergie glanced skeptically at the professor. He knew why his friend was being so loud and joking. He was scared, but Fergie said nothing. He just got a firm grip on the handle of his searchlight and followed the professor down into the blackness. Fergie counted 39 steps until they reached the bottom and walked onto a slippery marble floor. It was very dark, but the searchlight showed a long, whitewashed tunnel that stretched away into the distance. Slowly they began to move along. After every few steps, the professor would stop and play the beam of his small flashlight over the walls on both sides of them. Fergie saw that there were white marble tablets set on the walls. Each was about 3 square feet and had a name carved on it. Fergie didn't need to be told that there was probably a coffin behind each slab. He read some of the names: Ulysses Theodore Windrow, 1858 to 1910. Symphorsa Windrow, 1882 to 1920. Uther Tintagel Windrow, 1838 to 1900. "Here they all sleep, the members of the nasty and sinister Windrow clan," muttered the professor. "As you can see, some of them died before this church was built, sometime between 1900 and 1909. Old Zeb must have dug the bodies out of whatever cemetery they were planted in so we could bury them here. Yuck, what a weird old patootie he must have been. I wonder where his tomb is." The professor's voice trailed off. He stopped before a black doorway that was set in one of the side walls of the tunnel. The arch that framed the doorway was made of veined reddish marble, and on the lintel was a carving that showed a jawless skull between 2 hourglasses. Below the skull was a stone banner with some Latin words on it. "Penetrans ad interiora mortis." "Heavenly days!" exclaimed the professor, taking a step backwards. "I knew Zeb was an odd duck, but this really takes the cake. Can you imagine anyone putting up a doorway like this in a family tomb? The Latin phrase means penetrating the heart of death. It's not a sure thing it's not the sort of thing you normally find inscribed in a crypt. I wonder." Again his voice died away. He moved the light a bit to the left and saw a greenish bronze plaque with a fancy scrawled border. The plaque said, "In the lower crypt are interred the remains of Ensign U.T. French, Mr. Elijah Rehoboam Windrow, Miss Ursula Tench Windrow, Reverend Zimri K.H. Windrow." "Hey!" Fergie exclaimed. "There he is, Ensign French!" The professor shivered a little. An icy draft was coming from the black doorway, and it made him feel uneasy. Actually, he was more than just uneasy. A strange panic was rising inside him. He did not want to step down into that freezing darkness, but he knew that he was going to. The thought of Johnny lying still and cold under a white sheet made him summon up all his cranky courage. He had to go down there, if the legions of hell were blocking the way. "Well, Byron," he said in a voice that trembled, "are you ready?" Fergie grinned and shrugged carelessly. "Yeah, sure, I'm ready if you are. But the way the air feels, this is more like a walk-in cooler than a burial vault. Maybe it's the place where the workmen keep their beer cold." The professor said nothing. He strode forward boldly and flashed his light into the yawning black pit. Broad, worn steps stretched away before them. After a brief hesitation, they started down. The flight of stairs began to curve to the left almost immediately, and it turned into a spiral that wound around and around endlessly. The farther down they went, the colder it got, but there was something more than cold here. There was an evil, brooding stillness that weighed on their hearts, filling them with despair. Fergie wanted to say clever, witty things, but they stuck in his throat. The professor just stumped doggedly on, moving his flashlight mechanically back and forth. After many turns and countless steps, they passed under a low arch